Originally an idea for the Star Trek series pilot, Mudd's Women would go down in Trek history as a clear example of how not to make a Star Trek episode, due to its sexist treatment of women. But what's the story behind this anti-Trek Vision type episode? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information of any given topic in Star Trek. In this episode, we're taking a look at the Star Trek The Original Series episode Mudd's Women, to better understand its place in Star Trek history. My first encounter with this particular episode of Star Trek The Original Series happened rather late in my first viewing of TOS. Having started with the episode The Trouble with Tribbles back in my childhood, by the time this episode came around on Channel 28, I was already familiar with the various ideas and concepts of Star Trek. And so you can imagine a young me raising my eyebrow and saying WTF when I did finally get to see this episode. For me, like many in fandom, Mudd's Women went completely against the idea of a bright future where women were seen as equals and valued members of society. That being said, TOS overall tended to treat women really badly, something I didn't see until I got much older. But I just couldn't understand how this episode ended up being made in the first place. So researching and making this episode of Backtrek brought a long overdue sense of closure for me. The origins of Mudd's Women go all the way back to the story options for the pilot of Star Trek. Written by Gene Roddenberry himself, it comes as no surprise to me that this episode was one of his first ideas. In more recent years, Gene's obvious womanizing ways have become well known. So it's easy to see him writing an episode where he cavalierly treats women as sexual objects rather than the Star Trek appropriate equals. Thankfully, NBC, when offered 3 scripts to choose from for the original pilot, did not choose this episode, and when Gene blew the dust off the script again for the TOS second pilot, NBC again declined. This was because they were worried about the central theme of selling women throughout the galaxy, and the guest stars being an intergalactic pimp and 3 space hookers. Their words, not mine. Once Star Trek was accepted as a series, however, Gene would decide to go with the story anyhow, and Mudd's Women would go into full production. Stephen Kandel would be brought in to write the teleplay for this episode. He would end up fleshing out the character of Harry Mudd, but found Gene's obsessive involvement in this episode quite distressing. He recalls, "Gene had the idea of using a personal enhancer allure drug, and I provided the character of Harry Mudd. We spent several afternoons talking about it, and out of the conversation evolved the story idea, and then of course I wrote the teleplay. Gene went over that teleplay in great, meticulous, and obsessive detail. It was clear that this script touched Gene at a very different level." Roger C. Carmel would be hired on to play the apparently space pimp character of Harry Mudd. Carmel did an excellent job of bringing Mudd to life. Harry Mudd is probably the most endearing part of the entire episode. So much so that they would bring the character back for an episode in Season 2 and even an episode of the animated series, and I believe that's all down to Carmel's acting. There's some sort of magic that he adds to the character, which few actors can do with a character like Mudd. And as a result, the character would become iconic in the Star Trek universe, even making appearances in Star Trek Discovery and a short trek entitled The Escape Artist. Roger C. Carmel died on November 11, 1986, after suffering a massive heart attack. He was 54 years old. A little bit of Trek trivia for you all here is in regards to the script itself. There were several scenes that would be deleted from this episode, but one that particularly upset Carmel was a scene in which Harry Mudd would attempt to convince Uhura to take the Venus drug. As he recalls, "I remember being very disappointed because I felt the rather lengthy monologue was very effective and was very much to the point of the show's philosophy." Nevertheless, Carmel loved the episode. An on-set problem for Star Trek first reared its ugly head during the production and filming of this episode. The actors' uniforms for the series were made of velour, and what many of you might not know about velour is that it has a tendency to shrink after repeated washes. So after the final day of filming on the Corbomite maneuver, the uniforms were sent en masse once again to the dry cleaners. But this time, when they returned, the amount that they had shrunk was quite noticeable when the actors buttered themselves up and slipped them on, forcing the costume department to quickly throw together several new uniform shirts for this episode. And due to time constraints, only had enough time to sew uniforms for the main actors. So if you look carefully at the background actors in this episode, you can see the uniforms are far too tight on some and clearly riding up on others. Mudd's Women marks the first filmed appearance of the soundstage Cyclorama used for different planets throughout the entire series. To accomplish the feel of a new and different world, colored gel filters were used. Associate producer Robert Bob Justman came up with this idea after realizing that reusing the same cloudy background from the two pilots over and over again would result in all the planets looking the same. Justman personally decided the backdrop colors for each episode, but problems often arose when the color gels either faded or burned up after a short while in front of the hot stage lighting, and the burning gels often made an unbearable odor for those working on the set. Another little bit of Trek trivia is in regards to Grace Lee Whitney. Though the character of Janice Rand does not appear in this episode, Whitney was actually on set for the filming of the entire episode, as she wanted to get familiar and comfortable with the sets, props, and mood for Star Trek. Harvey Heart would be hired to direct this episode. Hart had an extensive career in directing, with 81 credits to his name, but both Gene and Herb Solow were not impressed with him at all. Taking his camera shots to the extreme, Mudd's Women would go over in its shooting schedule by an entire day. And although those angles made for refreshing-looking television, the cost overrun did not match the director's artistic nature. And as a result, Hart would never be invited to return to Star Trek. Harvey Hart died of complications due to a heart attack on November 21st, 1989. Karen Steely would be brought on board as Eve, the main woman of Mudd's cargo. Karen had 79 acting credits to her name from 1953 to 1972. Usually being typecast as a strong, hard-boiled type of woman in most of the roles that she played. She died of cancer on March 12, 1988. Maggie Threat and Susan Denberg would round out Mudd's Women as Ruth and Maggie. Maggie would only have a short career in acting, with 15 credits to her name and is still alive today, while Susan, who is also still alive today, would only spend about a year as an actress, with only 5 credits to her name. Susan would also have a short stint in modeling, appearing as a Playboy Playmate of the month of August 1966, shortly after filming of this episode. Originally, reception for this episode was actually quite positive, most fans of the show seeing it as a fun romp through the Trek universe. It wasn't until later on that the truth of the episode became quite clear, that being that it was a direct product of the 1960s. Even when describing this episode in an interview, the problem can be seen in Herb Solow's own words, as he recalls, "It was very well written, it was fun, and it featured 3 beautiful women hookers selling their bodies throughout the galaxy." NBC program manager Jerry Stanley recalled, One of the problems we had with this episode was trying to talk Gene Roddenberry out of some of his more explicit and outlandish sexual fantasies that would come to life in this script. Some of the scenes he would describe were totally unacceptable, and once women began to get into Star Trek, we got a lot of mail about Mudd's Women. William Shatner even noted the fact that Mudd's Women was produced at all is still a minor miracle. Author Paula M Block summed up the sexism in this episode by commenting, "Take Eve, the most rational of the three women. After spending most of her life cleaning up after a bunch of unappreciative male siblings, all she wants is the opportunity to connect with a good man. Even after learning that she doesn't need the Venus drug to appear desirable, Eve can't foresee a future that doesn't involve snaring a man. The thought of serving aboard a starship never even occurs to her, except perhaps as the captain's woman. So she consigns herself to life on the barren Rigel 12, cleaning up for another unappreciative male, Minor Ben Childress, and listening to the winds blow day and night." Mudd's Women is one of those very odd episodes in Trek, one that seemingly goes against what Roddenberry worshippers tend to blindly follow as Gene's vision. When looking back at TOS, however, it's easy to forget that episodes like this were made in a different time, a time when women weren't seen as equals, oftentimes seen archaically as a form of property. And from that starting point, we tend to lay heavily in on the sexist injustices done in these types of episodes. We ask questions like, why is virtually every woman on the show a supermodel in looks? Why are they all dressed in the skimpiest of outfits in this utopian future? Why can't women be captains in the 23rd century? It's an unfortunate paradox of the TOS series. And while being a product of its time is certainly not an excuse, it is an explanation, and can directly show how much Star Trek has not only changed, but has grown. Star Trek has learned from its own past, like us all, and so an episode like Mudd's Women can be both criticized for what it got wrong and appreciated for what it got right. And whether you love or hate the episode, Mudd's Women is certainly a signpost in the Trek universe as a warning that both Star Trek and humanity continually needs to strive to capture those ideals held within its storylines that are worth weaving into a brighter future for us all. That, of course, being equality and diversity. And this alone earns this controversial episode its place in Star Trek history.
Captain's log, stardate 1329.1. The Enterprise brings aboard the survivors of an ill-fated vessel.
Hello.
And the ladies? Is this your crew, Captain?
This is me cargo.
I read once a commander has to act like a paragon of virtue. I never met a paragon.
Neither have I. Mr. Walsh, I'm convening a ship's hearing on your actions. Mr. Spock will supply you with any legal information you may need.
You're a hard-nosed one, Captain.
And you're a liar, Mr. Walsh.
Take the one, so you'll get killed.
Just have those crystals here when I get back.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrack. What do you think of Mudd's Women? Would you rate it as one of the most sexist episodes of Star Trek the Original Series? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Now, I know some of you will be furiously typing about the facts of sexism and Roddenberry that I presented here. And if you want to discuss these aspects, I'm completely open to doing so. But please note, if you come into the comments phasers firing, you'll get the Starfleet-issued boot by me right out the nearest airlock. Discussing issues is a wonderful thing that we can all do as adults, so keep that in mind if you wish to have your comment seen and considered. Want to help the channel reach total equality for human beings? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.